Hello, my name is Sydney, and last week I put up a video about 5 pieces of bad writing advice that I've heard or seen floating around there, and then just explaining why I thought each of them sucked. So I'll leave that link down below, but in this video I thought I'd turn things towards the positive, and I'm going to give you 5 pieces of good writing advice that I've heard and that I still follow even to this day. So let's just get into it. Number 1. Kind of generally, any advice that encourages you to try something, whether it's to try outlining if you're not an outliner, or to try going to like a writing workshop, any advice that encourages you to try something rather than telling you that you should do it, that you have to do it, that you won't be a good writer unless you do this one thing. Because first of all, writing is incredibly subjective. What works for one writer may not work for others. So even if like, I don't know, 90% of writers do this one thing and they find, whatever success with it, that doesn't mean that it's going to work for the other 10% of writers. So whenever I see writing advice that says like, try this, or, give this a shot, I always kind of feel really good about that writer is encouraging other writers to test unknown waters and see if it works for them. Because sometimes you can find something that's really going to work for you, that's really going to help you figure out your story or whatever it may be, just by giving it a shot. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Number 2, and I think this is so important, write for you before you write for anyone else. So you're writing your story and maybe you really want to be published one day and you really want, thousands or hundreds of thousands of readers to love your story, right? But you can't write that story for them. The writers might try to write to have their book fall into certain trends that are going on. Like, several years ago after Twilight, there was all kinds of vampire books. Now that could have just been a coincidence that all these writers came together and wanted to write books about vampires. Or, it might be safe to say that maybe that happened with a few writers, but for a lot of the vampire books, especially ones that came out later, it's possible that, writers or people in the industry sought out vampire books because it was popular and they thought that their book could sell well. That's not always the case. And if you write a book with that intention, readers can see right through that. If you're looking at their creative project, if you're reading their book, I feel like you can sense their passion through those words, So it's really important to write for you. What story do you want to read, Sometimes you may want to read a very specific book. You might want to read a book about, I don't know, mermaids in space who, use lasers to fight bats. I don't know, something really you may have a really specific idea of something that you want to read, or even a certain style of book or a certain format of book or a story that you want to tell or that you want to read, but maybe it's not out there yet, so that's a perfect opportunity for you, if you're the creative type who wants to create that thing, to go out and create it. And that way you'll find so much passion working on a project. Working on a novel is not an easy thing, and it's not a quick thing. It takes so much of your mental energy that if you don't love what you're doing, I quite frankly don't know how you can see that process all the way through. Number 3, trying out writing sprints. Writing sprints are a godsend. I love writing sprints. I don't do them all the time. I mainly use them for getting into the work. So like sometimes I find myself a bit stagnant, or I'm just like procrastinating getting started, or maybe I'm overthinking the scene and I'm not quite sure how I want to have it come across in the page. But like setting a timer for like say 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever you feel comfortable with, and then just like using that blocked out time to focus on this one thing. You're focusing just on your story. You're not thinking about other work you have to do around the house or like with your family or your friends or bills or whatever. You're not focusing on any of that stuff. You're focusing on your story, and I find that just helps it. I'm a really easily distracted person, so when it comes to focusing, that is just honestly not my strong suit unless I'm super invested in something. But like even with my writing, I can find myself daydreaming and kind of just like thinking about other things a lot. But like a writing sprint, a timed writing sprint, it's just like a switch is turned on in my brain, and all of a sudden all those other things that I've been thinking about or that can distract me are gone, and I'm only focusing on this one thing because I know that there's an end point. I know that I'm not going to be sitting here forever staring at this screen not doing anything. I know that, okay, just 15 minutes, just 30 minutes, and then I can go back to worrying about whatever I want. So the first draft of my book, Storm Cloud, the first 30,000 or so words were written exclusively through writing sprints during 1 month of Camp NaNoWriMo. Like literally, I wrote every single word through a writing sprint, the first 30,000 words, because I just set a timer and I did it. And then I would take a few minutes break and then I would do another sprint, and I just did that a lot throughout the month. And I feel like writing sprints are really good if you find yourself maybe crunched for time. Like maybe you only have 15 minutes, before you have to leave the house and go somewhere. hey, do a writing sprint. That way you'll feel super productive going on with the rest of your day. So if you've not given writing sprints a try, I definitely encourage it. Just set a timer, open up your Word document or whatever, Scrivener, whatever you use to write your story or your notebook, and just do it. Try it out. Number 4, and this is something that I've had to overcome, and even now I still find myself dabbling in it just a bit, is to not edit as you go. For the first several years of writing, I always found myself, you know, rereading things I had already written, making tweaks to them. Oh, here's a better way to word that sentence. Oh, let me rewrite it this way. Oh, let me go back and do this other thing. Never really making progress forward to the rest of the story. I had to basically kind of train myself to not do that, and this definitely kicked in around the time when I was writing Stormcloud with those writing sprints. It's because I was spending all this time writing, I didn't have time to go back and look at it. And I actually know a lot of writers like to, when they sit down to start their writing for the day, they actually go back and reread whatever the last thing they wrote was to kind of get them in that headspace. And I think that's great if you have the discipline to not start editing, but me, not so much. For the most part, I don't go back and reread what I wrote, unless it's been just a long time since I sat down to write. I just sit down and start writing the next scene, which is why usually I try to end at the end of a scene, you know, get to a good stopping place so that I don't have to reread what the first half of the scene was about. And the other point that I made in my last video about bad writing advice is that there's no point sitting there editing all these words and scenes and stuff that could end up getting nixed because they don't belong in the draft anyway. And number 5, shitty first drafts, okay? Dude, who was it that said this? Was it Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird? As a writer who sees all these beautiful published books on the shelf, especially if you're new to the writing game, you see these books and they seem perfect. Every sentence is perfectly worded. You know, it's like there's not one typo on the page. The story is told beautifully. The characters are well developed, and you think, you know, sitting down maybe to write for the first time, that your first draft has to look like that. But that's just it. It's a first draft, first of several, okay? And there's no reason for you to try to get it perfect on the first draft, because that is probably impossible, I would say. Shitty first drafts gives you the freedom to crank out the story. Just sit down, write the story, let it be crap, let it be fun, let it be exploratory, let it be wordy, let it be long-winded, let it be maybe even too sparse. Maybe you didn't put enough details in. Maybe this character falls completely flat. Maybe the character has no motivation. Maybe this plot thread just completely dropped and you never saw it through. Beautiful. Let it be shitty. It just gives you so much freedom to be able to write this draft the way you want to write it, the way you need to write it in order to get everything down on the page. That's what revisions are for, is to go back and polish up that draft. And it's not going to be polished after the second draft either, or the third maybe even. It could take several drafts of tweaking things, of even replotting scenes altogether. Maybe the second chapter actually needs to be the 8th chapter, or maybe the first 3 chapters go nowhere and your story really starts on the 4th chapter. These are things that you wouldn't be able to figure out if you didn't write a first draft that had all these issues with it, that had all these things that needed to be fixed. There's so much freedom in writing a first draft that, you know, just lays bare everything you needed to lay bare. And then when you finish that draft, when you finally hit the end, it just feels so good. It feels so liberating, you know? Let yourself bask in that for a little bit. You might think your first draft is the best thing ever written. It's the great American novel, okay? But it's not, and that's okay, you know? So that's all that I have for my 5 good writing advice things that I've heard. Was that a sentence? I don't know. But down below, if you guys have any bits of writing advice that you've heard throughout your time writing that you want to share, that you thought were really good, maybe something that you still think about even now when you sit down to write, I would love to hear it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell notification icon so you can be notified whenever I post new videos, and of course hit that subscribe button for more editing and writing and creative writing and stuff like that, for videos with that type of content to come. And I will see you next time. Toodaloo.